Thank you again for joining us for the first in our Beyond Health Habits series, Replace Stress Management with Best Management. I'm thrilled to be joined again today by our guest speaker, Bob Merberg. Bob has really committed his career to finding and creating innovative wellness solutions that put employees first and lead to a productive, engaged, sustainable workforce. His work has been featured in Human Resources Executive, MarketWatch, the Score podcast, and PC Magazine. And with that, Bob, the floor is yours.
One of the things that I try to emphasize about employee well-being is that we tend to think of it as being all about behavior. And this quote here on the top, on the first slide, I'm not going to read to you everything on the slides, but it requires, it says that well-being requires attention to the work factors that affect health. And nowhere is this more true than the main thing that we're going to be talking about today, which is stress. But the CDC even says that wellness programs, that includes like stress management programs, they're inadequate because they focus too much on individual behaviors. You know, the kind of individual behaviors: exercise, healthy eating, and stress management. And the second quote here, the one that starts approximately 5% to 8%, this is from a study that showed that 5 to 8% of healthcare costs have to do with management practices. And this is a study that led to a current best-selling book some of you might have heard of, Dying for a Paycheck by Stanford's Jeffrey Pfeffer. So what about resilience and mindfulness training, those types of things that we're hearing a lot about for stress management? So the UK's Health and Safety Executive, which is like equivalent to OSHA in the US, they've gone far enough out on a limb to say that resilience and mindfulness programs, they aren't enough because they don't address the causes of job stress, and they're only going to help those people that participate in the program. You might have seen this if you were at my first Lumity webinar, but a quick review. There's a lot here, but in a nutshell, there's tons of objective studies that tell us that employee health is affected by the design of jobs, especially the levels of autonomy or control, demands, and support. So people in jobs with low autonomy, high demand, and weak support across all types of occupations, they experience stress that lead to health problems in the near and the long term. The health problems, they include things like heart disease, stroke, high blood pressure, depression, anxiety, burnout, which I'll be talking about in a future seminar, and for some people, even things like diabetes. And employees in jobs like this they're less likely to engage in those health behaviors that our wellness programs are trying to get them to engage in, like exercise and healthy eating. We'll delve into the specifics of job design actually in the next seminar. But for now, I do want to check in with you about stress and pose the question, is some job stress good? Because you've probably been hearing lately that some stress is good. But because stress is defined as the harm caused by an imbalance of demands, job demands, and the resources to meet those demands, it's helpful to understand that there is no good job stress. And it's that understanding that drives us to want to address the problem. Calling stress good is essentially like, in my opinion, throwing our hands up in the air and telling our employees, who we say is our most valuable asset, that they're on their own. So job stress, it can affect your business. There's no doubt about it, with costs related to absenteeism, turnover, and healthcare. So there are some numbers on the slide. I'm not going to go over them individually. We don't need to use shocking numbers like the numbers on the slide, which some people will want to debate. I put these here because these are the numbers that are out there. Stress costs American business $300 billion a year. And they're generally accepted. I mean, the main point, and I think most of you won't argue with this, is that job stress is a major burden to business. And we're safe in believing that stress affects business because we know it affects the people in business. I've already mentioned some of the health conditions that have been linked to job stress, and they and some others are named on the slide as well. You know, as I mentioned earlier, because we're on a tight time frame and want to be respectful of your time, I'm not going to read everything on every slide, but I'll hit the high points. So I've talked a lot about the job factors that affect employee stress and consequently employee well-being. So what are those factors? Here are some main categories on this slide. I'm going to describe these in more detail. I've already mentioned demand, control, or autonomy, and support. And another major category is role. So more about that soon. In this diagram, I've also, by the way, taken the liberty to group a bunch of important things under demands, psychological demands, physical demands, effort reward imbalances, the demands of change, organizational change, and unfair and disrespectful treatment. So let's look at each of the main 4 categories a little more closely. Demands. High demands aren't necessarily bad, but when an employee lacks the resources to meet those demands, that's when bad stress happens. So at your workplace, demands include things like work overload, boring or repetitive tasks or duties. Working long hours is a really big one, like chronically working long hours, not taking lunch breaks, not going on vacation, things like that. And that might give you some ideas of even like policies that you can have and implement to encourage employees to restore, to recharge. Job insecurity is demand, and some other things I mentioned like adapting to change. So think of demand as conditions that cost energy and resources as things that give, save, or restore energy. And that includes things like training, time, feedback, tools, technology. So the seminar is about best management, and here are some of the management practices in the realm of demands that support employee well-being. Identifying when resources are needed and getting those resources, understanding team members' abilities and providing training, and things like rotating boring tasks or undesirable responsibilities. Control or autonomy. Do employees have a say about the way they do their work when it comes to things like scheduling, the way they schedule their work schedule, the task, how they go about doing the work, and decision-making, the latitude they have to make the decisions that affect their work or that are involved in the course of their work. Best management practices for well-being in the control domain. The main thing is the importance of employee input and how work is done. It's one of the most commonly recurring findings in the research on job stress. Participation is having employees participate in those things that affect them is really a key thing to preventing job stress. And you want to avoid micromanagement, not listening to employees and making decisions without consultation, not allowing time off for employees' development or to attend trainings. Role. If you ask employees what's stressing them out on the job, and I know this because I've done this a lot, you may be shocked at how many of them give answers that are somehow related to their role. They're not sure what's expected of them. Like maybe they have no job description, the explanation of the job. They don't know what their job's purpose is or how it fits into the big picture. Maybe they have a job description and it's nothing like their job. They get conflicting direction from multiple managers and or coworkers. I think most of us have probably had to deal with that at times in our careers. Moving goalposts, so the goals are always changing. And there are issues of job person fit, which I'll be addressing in a future seminar on job crafting. And there's also role spillover. Are employees' non-work roles interfering with their work, and or are their work roles interfering with their personal life? It's where many of us would categorize work-life balance. So best management practices for role include keeping folks informed about the big picture, agreeing on clear goals, clearly defining roles, expectations, and lines of communication, and avoiding contradictory instructions. Support includes both social support from coworkers, having a friend at work, feeling like part of the group, having someone you can confide in, or seek support on personal or professional matters, and also support from managers and the organization. Best management practices include recognizing good work, and recognition isn't always saying good job or just saying good job, but often recognition needs to take the form of something more meaningful like opportunity. Leading a no-blame culture, which has to do with psychological safety, which you've been hearing a lot about lately. Following up on complaints, respecting employee confidentiality, dealing with encouraging interaction and work-life balance. So, stepping back for a second, you might feel like you're already addressing these work factors in other initiatives like employee engagement or training and development. And that's really part of the beauty and the reality of how employee well-being is interconnected with everything else in the company. You know, it's not just some random fitness program or work-life balance workshop. And one of the keys is working with managers on these factors: demands, autonomy, support, and roles, and helping them understand that these are the underpinnings of employee well-being and productivity. And that has to be an ongoing process. And it's essential. You know, if you're running a regular wellness program and you ever expect any real effect, you have to have these other things in place. So what does it look like in practice? I've adapted here an actual case I'm going to run through real quickly. I've changed enough info to protect the anonymity of the employer. A large insurance company was concerned about rapidly increasing absences due to stress. They introduced a new stress policy. I haven't talked about stress policy. It's important. You can find examples on the web. They established a corporate stress steering group. They assessed the causes of stress in the company. And again, there are surveys out there, but you can come up with your own survey to assess stress and the causes of stress, or use existing data like some of what you might have from your employee engagement survey. You can conduct focus groups, etc. Teams and focus groups at this company reviewed the assessment results and made recommendations. And this was key. There were multiple trainings offered to raise awareness about how to deal with and manage stress in the framework that I'm talking about here. And a shadowing program was put in place to increase employees' knowledge of each other's roles and responsibilities. And this company cut their stress-related sickness days by about 33% in the first year following intervention. So generally, there's some agreement on the process for preventing stress, and prevention is what we're talking about, not just managing stress or becoming more hardened to it. The systematic approach includes assessment of the risk factors, which are demands, autonomy, insufficient support, role, engaging employees in a participatory approach, and then matching the interventions to the problems identified in your assessment. If you're using a turnkey solution to solve job stress, and I'm sorry because some of you probably came here today looking for that, but if you're using a turnkey solution to solve job stress, you're doing it wrong. And we need genuine commitment from company leadership. So while it all may seem daunting, you can start small, and if you really want to make a difference for your organization and your employees, you need to address the management practices that affect stress and well-being, and you can know that the facts will be on your side. And that's all I have for you today.
Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for your patience. Again, this is Aaron Huang. I'm the head of marketing at Lumity. And thanks again for joining us for our second Skiminar in our Beyond Health Habits series today. We're going to be talking about our community's highest rated topic, job design, the missing link for employee well-being. Something very near and dear to my heart and our speaker, Bob Merberg's as well. Bob's Skiminar today literally has years of inside experience baked into it. And for those of you who don't know Bob yet, his work has been featured in Human Resources Executive, Market Watch, The Score podcast, and PC Magazine. So please do find him on the interweb. Bob, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. Let's get started by addressing the fundamental question here today. What is job design? Job design, so sometimes also called work design, has to do with the tasks, activities, relationships, and responsibilities of a job and how they're allocated and organized. In a minute, I'll get into some specific elements of job design. In the real world, we see some level of job design and redesign everywhere. When a new job is created, when there are reorganizations and responsibilities are shifted around, sometimes in process improvements, whether they're called that or not. So for example, I was once on a team that was working with the job holders to redesign a frontline position held by a couple of thousand employees. Other times as a manager, I've created new individual contributor jobs or redesigned existing jobs that were held by just a few people. So job design takes place in a lot of different contexts, and as long as there are jobs in your organization, there's been some job design, but usually when we're designing jobs or seeing jobs designed in our organizations, it's being done without much attention to the principles of good job design or to what research tells us about job design and well-being. But one of the things research tells us, and my own experience confirms this, is that as for the needs of the business, good job design makes better use of employee skills, and when jobs are well designed, based on principles I'll share them in a second, the work gets done more efficiently and effectively by a more engaged workforce. And it leads to productivity benefits in terms of reduced absenteeism and turnover too. But let's talk about the well-being of employees. I want to reemphasize something I've shared previously. It's really one of the most important things to know if you're dealing with employee well-being and productivity in any capacity. The basic ingredients of employee well-being: job demands, autonomy, and support. Now, if you're wondering what this has to do with physical fitness and obesity and what's often thought of as wellness, well, first, there's really been a move away from that sort of exclusive focus on physical health. But if that's your interest, I'll remind you that employees have a much better chance of adopting healthy behaviors if they're engaged in healthy work. That's why, for employers, healthy work has to take priority for well-being. But even putting behaviors aside for now, people in jobs that have unreasonable demands, little autonomy, and limited support tend to have relatively bad health outcomes. You're dealing with a high level of health-related job stress or job strain, the kind that's been linked to a host of health problems, from heart disease to gastrointestinal problems to depression. And there's a lot of evidence on this. So high demands in and of themselves aren't necessarily bad. The jobs with high demands, when those demands are reasonable, like challenging work or even high workload, as opposed to overwhelming demands like ambiguity and endless mandatory overtime or an impossible workload, reasonable high demands can actually be good for well-being when there's plenty of autonomy and social support. So as we talk about this, demands, autonomy, and support, you may be starting to anticipate what makes a good job design good. Once you know that a good job design will have as much as possible reasonable demands, sufficient autonomy, which includes having say in how a job gets done, the pace and schedule of work, latitude to make decisions, and social support, with those in mind, there are just some key principles to know. So first, the core principles of good job design. Good job design is holistic. It addresses the physical, mental, and social aspects of work and the needs and capabilities of employees. It considers business needs and the work environment, and it enhances well-being and business success. So ultimately, good job design leads to job satisfaction and engagement, to learning and development, and to innovation. These are four core principles, values around what good job design is. They're also what are called action principles, values for how a job design gets done. But I'm going to pause for a second. Before I get to action principles, I feel like I can hear your brain short-circuiting with all this theoretical stuff. So don't worry, because before we wrap up this topic, I'm going to distill this down to 3 simple, actionable takeaways for you. But hang in there with me as I share with you how we're getting to those 3 simple tips. So here are the action principles. 1, engage decision makers and leaders. They need to be part of the process and open to embracing the results, and they need to be educated about the importance of good job design. But just as important, maybe more important, 2, involve the people who do the work, and when it can be helpful, other stakeholders. This is a crucial element of participatory approach. 3, identify risks. What kind of risks? Well, they include the things we discussed: a lack of support from coworkers, from supervisors, even from the organization, not enough autonomy, and unreasonable demands. These are the primary risks to an employee's well-being. Setting aside for now physical risks and safety, these are what we consider the psychosocial risks. But speaking of safety, one way to think of this is these are the risk factors for psychosocial injury, a term that's been used a lot in Australia, where there's been a huge amount of work done around principles of job design. When we think of psychosocial injury and the way it eventually shows up in physical health, the idea of identifying and reducing risks starts to feel a lot more intuitive. It's the same way a safety expert is trained to approach prevention of physical injuries. You start by reducing the risk as much as possible. You don't start by trying to change other people's behaviors. So back to our principles 4, the final action principle: learn from experts, evidence, and experience. In other words, know your own limits, study up, and get help when you need it. So once you know overall principles, the core principles and the action principles, but what do you actually do when you're designing a job? Unfortunately, just like with best management practices for well-being that I've previously shared, there's no turnkey solution. In fact, the fact that employee participation is part of an action principle of job design means that there's no one right way to do it. It has to be responsive to what's going on with the job. I'll share an example job design intervention on the next slide, but here are basic steps that can be applied in most situations, especially where an existing job is being redesigned. So one, do an assessment of current work practices. Is job redesign needed? Is it feasible? Two, do a task analysis. So people get stuck here, but this doesn't have to get super technical. You can get a handle on job tasks based on a combination of dialogue, observation, and existing documentation, like job descriptions, of course. Three, design the job. So earlier, I alluded to a few of the specific elements that you may work with in job design, like how should tasks be allocated within a team with autonomy in mind? Which decisions can be made by the job holder? How much flexibility is there in the job? Are mundane tasks broken up with more challenging tasks or responsibilities while avoiding overloading or underloading the job? Thinking about support. Where can the job holder go for help? How are they integrated into teams? Is there opportunity for social interaction? So broadly speaking, your approaches to redesigning a job might include any combination of three types of changes. You modify the quantity, which conventionally is thought of as enlarging the amount of responsibilities, but I'll tell you that in practice, I find reducing low-value responsibilities is more often more effective change. You can modify quality, enriching the job with greater responsibility, more accountability, independence, and new opportunities. And rotation. You're moving employees from one task to another, or more likely in knowledge-based settings and professional settings, you might be in rotating responsibilities among different team members. But quantity, quality, and rotation, those are the broad elements of redesigning a job. So back to the steps in our job design process. Number 4, implement the new job design gradually. And again, that applies mostly to redesigning an existing job. 5, reevaluate job design on a regular basis and make any necessary adjustments. Don't panic at all this text. You're not going to need to read all of it. This is an example that will give you a sense of the scope of job design. This is from a study of hospital nurses and aides. They used an intervention, really interesting to me, based on a German concept of health circles, which is a process in which employees hold facilitated meetings to identify the work-related risks to their health and what can be done to reduce risks and improve their health, with an emphasis on our old friends' demands, autonomy, and support, which they get trained on. So health circles are really a scalable, pure participatory approach. And we don't have time for me to go over the whole study, but I wanted to at least give you an opportunity to have a glance at the slide, which is just a very small sample of job design issues and solutions that the health circles came up with. And you can see that these caregivers identified and improved some very specific things in how their work gets done. Things like new systems to address overload demands when shorthanded, fairer processes for training, better communication systems, which reduce ambiguity and improve effectiveness, improved scheduling, more autonomy in decision-making, and addressing uncivil or unfair treatment. This also gives you a sense of the inevitable overlap between job design and best management practices. Those things go hand in hand. But so 3 years after these changes were made, the caregivers reported improved levels of demands, autonomy, and social support, and their work quality improved, and all the health measures in the study improved. There were fewer sleep disorders, better overall mental health based on symptoms of things like depression and anxiety, and less burnout. A control group in the study got worse on almost all the health measures. I've covered a lot, and if this is new to you, there's no way you can take it all in, so don't try. and don't feel like you should be able to transform your organization tomorrow by overhauling the design of a key job, you can work up to that if you want. For now, if you can just keep in mind that, one, good job design, along with best management practices, is an engine of employee well-being and productivity. And two, that you're shooting for a healthy balance of job demands, autonomy, and support, with three, a good dose of employee participation. So just having this knowledge to influence how you or leaders in your organization are designing jobs, you'll get results. And you'll be much closer to achieving real employee well-being than you've ever been before.
All right. Good morning and good afternoon, everyone. This is Aaron Huang. I'm the head of marketing at Lumity. We're live at HR Tech this morning. There's been a lot of great sessions, a lot around AI and people analytics, and I'll be the first to attest to data transforming employee experience. But as I hear these sessions and discussions, I think what's really important in all of this is to take a step back and carefully consider what drives our employees, what the context and variables are between engagement and burnout. Really, what makes some employees highly engaged while others burn out? What are those intrinsic and extrinsic motivators? So let's take the people perspective today, and hopefully we can get some insights into how we can better design our cultures. As always, our wellness and well-being expert, Bob Merberg, is going to be walking us through his expertise on this topic in our third installment of our Beyond Health Habits series. Bob, the floor is yours.
A company hired me to help them with a wellness program. Before connecting with me, they were interested in pretty conventional stuff, health risk assessment, health screening, an on-site wellness center, et cetera. But I let them know that I wanted to get a first-hand look at their culture. One of the things they suggested was inviting me to one of their critical convo workshops, a full-day intensive program they were cascading out company-wide to help leaders, middle managers, and frontline employees learn the skills to engage in productive discussions about the topics they often avoided or that it tended to be inflammatory at work. So stick with me here. I was paired up with the director of organizational development, a company leader who spearheaded the program as part of the employee engagement initiative he'd been assigned to. I was paired up with him for the role playing we did between learning units. Critical Convos was an important, effective communication program, and near the end of the day, I said to this director, this could be a really important element of your company's wellness program. We could integrate it and use some stress and other wellness metrics to measure the program's benefit on well-being. Well, he looked at me like I'd grown a second head and sort of snarled, "I don't see the connection," and turned away to make it clear that for all his role-playing prowess, he had no intention to engage in this critical convo with me. First, let's look at burnout. The word is thrown around a lot, but it has a very specific meaning. Burnout is a psychological syndrome that shows up as exhaustion, like all-out emotional exhaustion, as well as physical, cynicism, and what I call self-doubt on the slide, but the correct term is lack of self-efficacy. Self-efficacy, it's your confidence in your ability to succeed at a task. But I take it further to say your confidence to have an impact by succeeding at a task. So nothing makes a difference. That's cynicism. That feeling of I can't make a difference is lack of self-efficacy. So burnout is exhaustion, cynicism, and lack of self-efficacy. Get this, experienced as a result of chronic job stressors. That's what burnout is. We don't know exactly how common burnout is, but we do know it's often found in people in various types of jobs, especially in human service jobs, but also customer service, food service, professionals like lawyers, prison guards, creative jobs. you don't have to love what you do to burn out in it. It's found in employees of all ages, in their 20s or their 60s, and at various stages of their careers, early and late, mid, found in men and women, and especially though in employees who work with people in some capacity, which is most employees. Work-related personal interactions, whether it's with clients, patients, coworkers, are an important part of burnout. Employee engagement, which also is called job engagement, and I tend to use the term commonly used in research, work engagement, is defined as a fulfilling work-related state of mind that shows up as vigor, absorption, and dedication. So employees who are engaged in their work have high levels of energy, are enthusiastic about their work, and they immerse themselves in their work activities. There's good reason to believe that burnout and engagement are opposite ends of the same spectrum, as this slide suggests, the spectrum of energy, involvement, and self-efficacy at work. I said that burnout and engagement are seen as opposite ends of the same spectrum, but it seems engagement may have more to do with motivation, and burnout relates more to health. So if your main interest in employee well-being specifically has to do with health, you'll be interested in these health problems that have been linked to burnout. One study showed that employees with high burnout levels had more than twice the risk of developing musculoskeletal pain compared to those without burnout. And other conditions linked to burnout are cardiovascular disease and a fairly full range of mental health and psychosocial problems. The relationship between engagement and health is less clear, but we do know that engagement is linked to many facets of productivity, including creativity, teamwork, job performance, and various business outcomes. Burnout, on the other hand, is associated with higher absenteeism, turnover, impaired performance, and a lack of teamwork. So burnout and engagement are important issues for employee well-being and for business outcomes. Christine Maslach is the leading American researcher on burnout and has written a number of books on the topic. And one of her main messages, and this is something that worldwide leading researchers on burnout agree on, is that burnout, first and foremost, has to do with the workplace environment, the work. And these include especially the interactions people have at work, more than it is a personal issue. The quote on this slide is from Maslach's book, The Truth About Burnout. It's her way of saying that to understand burnout and engagement, you can't just focus on the individual employee. Imagine investigating the personality of cucumbers, she says, to discover why they had turned into sour pickles without analyzing the vinegar barrels in which they had been submerged. This is a really, really difficult concept for employers to embrace for whatever reason. But anytime you hear about a potentially burnt out employee being referred to the EAP or for coaching, or getting saddled with a negative performance review, or encouraged to participate in a resilience program, remind yourself that these may help, but they aren't proper solutions because they deal only with symptoms and not with causes. Christine Maslach points to 6 domains of burnout and engagement, really 6 domains of work. Despite its position at the top of this illustration, workload tends not to be the primary driver that influences burnout or engagement. Autonomy, fairness, and workplace community, think social support, but especially in the form of a lively, attentive, responsive community, these are bigger factors. And if you've listened to my previous seminars, most of these domains will ring familiar. I've talked about the importance of all of these domains to well-being. The one I haven't talked about that much is values. And this has to do with the extent to which an employee's values line up with the company. Now, if you're attending this seminar, I'll assume you have some interest in well-being. So imagine, as an example, not to pick on any one industry, that you're hired by a tobacco company. If you're a strongly anti-tobacco person, it's likely, not certain, but likely that no matter your compensation, benefits, your nice boss, your fancy office, or even robust health and fitness programs that some tobacco companies have, you may never be fully engaged and certainly are at risk for burnout. There's too much of a mismatch in values. On the other hand, I can think of a company that makes outdoor gear, and it's at the forefront of environmental activism and hires people who love the outdoors. This company's also been light years ahead of their time in work-life balance, and they've had startlingly high growth and low turnover rates, thanks largely to high work engagement and very low burnout. Employee and organizational values are in sync at that company. Maslow spotlights these three principles for reducing burnout, and I've always found this to be true in my own work. 1, prevention is better than treatment. 2, building engagement is the best way to prevent burnout. 3, organizational intervention is better than individual intervention. This is my last slide. Some of the organizational strategies are things I've previously discussed. Job redesign to match up job demands and autonomy based on employees' needs, and best management practices that reduce micromanaging, encourage meaningful recognition. One of the most successful burnout interventions is something called the civility, respect, and engagement with work, or CREW. Culture change intervention rolled out to 1,200 work groups and thousands of employees at the United States Department of Veterans Affairs, with an emphasis on civility, recognizing the importance, despite the preconceived notions of that OD director that I mentioned at the beginning of the presentation, the importance of civil interpersonal relations and interactions to the prevention of burnout. You can find lots of details about CREW, including its well-being, productivity, and financial outcomes on the web. Also on this list is adding job resources based on massive research showing that stress at work comes from job demands exceeding employees' resources, and adding resources that can cause burnout. And overall, really the most important thing that an employer can do for employee well-being is be a great employer, one that listens to employees and genuinely takes an interest in and values their well-being. There's a supplementary role for individual interventions: recovery, vacation, getting away, goes on. You remember all those things. My favorite form of recovery, sabbaticals. And individual intervention, that's where the stress management and resilience programs come in. They have a role. And finally, one of the most important things an employee can do to advance their own engagement and prevent burnout is job crafting. And that's the topic for the next webinar.
All right. Good morning and good afternoon, everyone. This is Aaron Huang, and I'm the head of marketing at Lumity. Job crafting is a topic that truly reflects the changing nature of our workplaces and our work today. Really, our society and culture at large is undergoing change in some ways more rapidly than in previous generations. I mean, the iPhone is only 10 years old. How we actually adapt to what many experts call tours of duty, and the ability to remain agile as both individual professionals and organizations is critical to the financial, physical, and dare I say, psycho-spiritual health and well-being of both employers and employees. As always, our wellness and well-being expert, Bob Merberg, is going to walk us through his expertise on this topic in our fourth and final installment of our Beyond Health Habits series. Bob, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Aaron, and hi, everyone. You're lucky because we saved the best for last. Today, we're talking about something that's really experiencing a groundswell of interest lately, job crafting. Now, if you've attended any of my other Lumity webinars or read my blog posts or attended one of my conference keynotes, you know employers' greatest effect on employee well-being has to do with work, with the organization, and the workplace environment. I love talking about the science, showing how employers can design jobs that promote employee well-being and productivity. Job design, though, it's a top-down approach driven by managers, which is great when managers know the principles of good job design. But top-down job design is only part of the story. Today, we're going to talk about bottom-up job design driven by the job holders themselves. This is job crafting. The slide here includes findings from a classic study of a hospital cleaning staff. I call them housekeepers because that's what they were called at the hospital I worked at. Interviews with these housekeepers found that different people in the same job at the same place experienced and thought about their work very differently because they crafted it differently. All of them, everyone in this study fell into one of two groups. Group one had strict boundaries around their job. You know, I'm not going to do anything that's not in my job description. They didn't interact with anyone. They didn't have to. And they didn't like the tasks of their job. And they didn't hold their role in very high regard. It was a cleaning job. The second group tweaked their tasks based on what needed to be done for the hospital to fulfill its mission and what fulfilled them. They sought out positive interactions with patients, visitors, and coworkers, refilling a patient's water glass, for example, or adjusting a picture hanging on the wall of their room to make the environment nicer, or initiating friendly chit-chat with stressed out visitors. Group two liked their job, and they saw it as requiring a special set of skills that they had. They viewed themselves as part of the care team, and they talked about themselves in those terms. So, what is job crafting? It's the changes employees make to their own job designs in ways that bring about work engagement, job satisfaction, and resilience. Amy Wisniewski, Jane Dutton, and Justin Berg are researchers. They all came from the University of Michigan, and in some combination, they were involved with the housekeeper study and a lot of the other research I'll mention today. Those names might not be that important to you, but it's super important for me, not to give the impression that I came up with these models or did this research myself. I'm a practitioner, not a researcher or a theorist. And since this hospital housekeeper study, Amy Wisniewski and her team and plenty of others have found over and over that employees craft their jobs, even in settings where they're prohibited from doing that. This is true across all occupations and industry studies at all different levels in the organization. We know that Google has been engaged with job crafting, as has Logitech, Burt's Bees, as well as some police departments, school teachers, chemical plant workers, and healthcare clinicians in the United States, Europe, and Asia. Yeah, Asia. My New York accent came out there. But as the hospital housekeeper study showed, some employees are more inclined to craft than others. So you might be wondering, if employees are doing this on their own, what am I supposed to do about it? And should I be getting the non-crafters to craft or getting the crafters to stop crafting, especially if it's not allowed? And I'll answer those questions once we get a closer look at the three kinds of job crafting: changing the tasks of the job, changing the relationships in the job, and changing how you're thinking about the job, called cognitive job crafting. In task crafting, employees change the quantity of tasks they do, the scope when they expand or contract those boundaries of their responsibilities, and how they do their tasks. The quote on the slide and those on the next few slides are real-life quotes taken verbatim from the paper called "What is Job Crafting and Why Does It Matter?" So here, this marketing coordinator describes crafting their job tasks by taking on as much event planning as they can, because they enjoy it, and in the process, increasing their value to the company and their own job satisfaction. And reading between the lines in this testimonial, we get a glimpse of something important about job crafting. It helps employees find a sense of purpose in their work. There's a lot of talk about meaning and purpose lately, but what can you do about it? So job crafting is one potential answer. There's also relational crafting. Employees change their interactions at work by tweaking the scope of relationships and the nature of those relationships. But for the housekeepers, we saw that the group that crafted sought out positive relationships with patients, visitors, and staff. And in the quote on this slide, this maintenance technician started helping new guys learn the job. He took it upon himself, and it became part of his job. Again, increasing his job satisfaction, and carved out an important role that added value to the organization. Finally, there's cognitive crafting. We already talked about how some hospital housekeepers came to see their job as being part of the care team. And the quote on this page offers another example. A university lecturer who loves performing music chose to view his lecturing as being like a musical performance. In HR and leadership literature, it's filled with classic stories of cognitive crafting, even if they don't call it that, like the janitor at NASA who told JFK that he saw his job as sending a man to the moon, helping to send a man to the moon, not just cleaning floors. So as you think about task, relational, and cognitive crafting, people get the best results when they do all three. Think about how you have crafted or can craft your own job. And know that job crafting is a way of resolving tension in person-job fit, which is part of why it helps prevent burnout and should help reduce turnover. All right, well, this would not be a Bob Merberg Lumity seminar if I didn't include one slide to throw you off track a little. But seriously, I'd be remiss if I talked about job crafting without pointing out that there's another branch of job crafting. I call it a branch. Arnold Baca and Evangelia Demirudi in the Netherlands who spearheaded this. They and others found that all traits of all jobs can be broken down into one of two categories: job demands and job resources. And this is the job demands resources model of, or it's called JDR. So here, job crafting is defined in terms of the changes employees make to balance the two types of traits that make up all jobs, demands and resources, with personal abilities and needs. I've listed examples of demands and resources on this slide, but there's a lot more to this than this, and new research and case studies coming out all the time, but we don't really have time to get into it. I just had to share it with you, though, because it's becoming more and more predominant in understanding stress, engagement, burnout, job motivation, and how employees engage in job crafting. You will be hearing about the JDR model, especially around stress, if you haven't already. And if this is too confusing, the key learning here on this slide is just that employees need enough resources to meet the demands of their jobs, and demands and resources are craftable. So good things usually come from job crafting, usually. Increased well-being, better job performance, smoother adaptability to change, more job satisfaction, increased work engagement, greater happiness, less psychological distress, which includes anxiety and depression and sleep problems, things that are really high on people's radars these days as we become more aware of mental health and mental health at the workplace, and less burnout. And by the way, this isn't just one of those correlations that goes without saying. Like, well, maybe happier people just view their jobs more positively and do better work, which would be a good skeptical thought for you to have. But no, there's some research where participants and control groups had their performance and happiness rated by coworkers and managers, and who didn't really know whether the person they were rating was in the control group or the active group. And it showed that job crafting leads to better performance, more adaptability to change, and greater happiness 6 months after a job crafting workshop. Now, in case you're wondering, theoretically, job crafting, it can go sour with employees tweaking their jobs in a way that's at odds with the organization. That's why, since we know that some employees certainly will craft their jobs one way or the other, it makes sense for you to be proactive in promoting positive job crafting. So how can we cultivate positive job crafting at our workplaces? Number one, once again, we see these key messages of autonomy and support. So Professor Demaruti from the Demands Resources School of Thought says here in his quote, give them the freedom to craft their jobs, but also specify and model what good crafting looks like. So we know that employees job craft whether you like it or not. So bring it out in the open where you can encourage it, model it in a way that lines up with organizational goals. 2, build job crafting into developmental plans, which I hope your organization is doing with all its employees, usually as part of the performance feedback process. Creating an open climate to engage in discussions with employees about how they can tweak their work in a way that makes it more meaningful to them. The 3, communicate the organization's strategic goals, which is always a good idea, but do it in a way that employees know the goal and in a way that invites them to craft their jobs and apply their strengths to help achieve those goals in a way that's meaningful to them. 4, hold job crafting swap meets. And I have to admit, I haven't actually seen this done formally, but it makes sense for teams that can be flexible enough. And I think it often happens informally in the evolution of teams. So an example, you have to write quarterly reports and you hate to. I have to sit through workers' comp utilization reviews and they make me want to pull my hair out. But I love writing reports, and you, for some strange reason, enjoy utilization reviews. So is there an opportunity to trade tasks and craft our jobs that way? So finally, offer job crafting workshops. So Wisniewski, who I mentioned before, that whole team I've been talking about, they created a job crafting exercise via the University of Michigan's Center for Positive Organizations, which you can get info about at jobcrafting.com. They have, in these, I call them workshops, they have employees envision the elements of their job as different kinds of building blocks and sketch out how much time and energy they spend on each element. And then they re-envision tasks and relationships based on their own strengths, where they find meaning, and their values. And remember, conflicts and values are one known source of burnout. participants create an after sketch that gives them something to work toward and gets them going with positive job crafting. Because job crafting doesn't all happen in one day. It's really more of a continuous thing. So I'm working with instructional designers. This is the last slide. And organizational psychologists to expand on the Michigan model and adding more of a well-being twist by mixing the latest research on demands and resources in a way that excites employees and adds value to their organizations. So I'm really excited about this. At the end of all the seminars and webinars I've been doing, I end with the disappointing news that there are no turnkey solutions. Aaron and I were just talking about that. But we're creating something that is really one of the few evidence-based opportunities to have an impact on well-being, work engagement, burnout, productivity, resilience, and adaptability to change. It's really exciting stuff. So I'm lining up as part of my own consulting practice, pilot workshops for the first half of next year. And if you think your organization might be interested or you just want to hear more about it, reach out to me. You can reach out to me via LinkedIn or through my website, josito.com. And I'd love to chat with you about it. And that's the 15-minute rundown on job crafting. And as the last in the series of seminars, I want to thank you attendees. And of course, I want to thank Aaron and the whole team at Lumity. I think it says so much about their forward thinking to encourage and to support and host these seminars I've offered and some of the other programs and events that I know they've been doing. And now, Aaron, I'll turn it back to you for any final comments.
Thank you, Bob. That was terrific. And I also want to personally thank everyone who's joined us on our Beyond Health Habits series. You know, honestly, what we really tried to present here are new frameworks to help the audience find thoughts so you can implement what I would call wise actions within your own organization's culture. If you're interested in more articles and case studies on this topic, we can provide additional resources, so just let us know. And as always, we're going to keep marching on with more content that our community finds useful and relevant. Have a great rest of the week, everyone, and take care of yourselves.